Alrighty, so we'll make a start. Hello everyone and welcome to Lifting the Lid, our free monthly webinar series where we lift the lid on strategic communication excellence. My name is Sia Papagiorgio and I'm the Director at the Centre for Strategic Communication Excellence. I'm joined today by my colleague Megan Francis, who is our Marketing and Communication Manager. We're both based in Melbourne, Australia, but wherever you are in the world, we hope you and your loved ones are safe and well. Today, I am absolutely thrilled to introduce to you one of my favourite people, keynote speaker, educator, and best-selling author, Gabrielle Dolan, who is obsessed about changing the way people communicate in business. She's so obsessed, she's written 5 books about it and is currently researching her 6th. She even started a movement to ban corporate jargon, and last year she was invited by the Obama Foundation to teach people about the power of storytelling as a leadership program. Today, Gabrielle, or Ral as she's better known, and I are going to talk about real communication and authentic leadership, what it means, what it looks like, and how we can all do it better. Ral says authentic leadership is hard to define, but easy to sense, and that no matter what your logic says, whether someone is authentic is almost a gut reaction. Even so, there are certainly ways you can practice authentic leadership and just be yourself. Unless, of course, you're a complete dick. Definitely pretend to be somebody else. That is my favourite line from your book. Before we begin, I just wanted to let you know there'll be plenty of time at the end of the webinar to address your questions. So please pop them into the chat. Megan will be keeping an eye on the chat function and we'll make sure to address your questions at the end of our Q&A with Ral. So on that note, welcome Ral, how are you?
I am great, and I love the fact that your favourite quote from my book is "Don't pretend to be someone else. Unless you're a dick, then pretend to be someone else."
Yes, that is one of my favourite lines from your book, indeed. So before we get started, I'm going to ask you the question on everybody's lips, and that is, why do they call you Ral?
So I've been called Ral all my life, and it literally is my younger sister could not pronounce my name, and it was like Gabrielle, and so Ral has stuck. So everyone calls me Ral except for my husband, and when I first met him, he said, "I can't believe you have such a beautiful name and you let people call you Ral." And I go, "Well, I don't think they say it like that," but anyway, that's where it came from.
Okay, so let's get stuck into it. Now, I want to start by asking you, and I was going to say, let's get on the same page, but I realize that's jargon and you've given me a complex about using jargon. I hear you in my head, Ral. How do you define authentic communication and real communication? What does that actually mean to you?
Look, it means several things. One is not using jargon, because I think a lot of the times when we're trying to communicate in a more authentic way, using jargon actually, it can disconnect and isolate people if they don't want to understand. I think it's also, a lot of the times in business, we try to use words that are big and fancy, and it's not, again, we're trying to sound smarter than what we are. So to me, it's not hiding something. It's when you get some communications and you read it and you go, "I don't even know what this means." So it's not being real. It's not like telling the truth. I like many other small businesses, applied for the business grant, and I got an email back saying, "You were unsuccessful because your finding had an inverse effect," or something. And I go, what is that? Like, it doesn't even tell you anything. So to me, it's about when you communicate, you got to really make sure people understand, and using real words, not using jargon, telling the truth, and not hiding. And when I mean by telling the truth, not hiding some of the truth. To me, that's all around real communication.
Okay. So real communication has always been important in business, and the comms experts on this call know that intimately, but why is it more important than ever that we get real with the way we communicate?
Yeah, look, I think over the last, I don't know, let's say 5 or so years, 10 years, I think expectations of employees are changing. So it's like this young, and when I say this new generation, it's like pretty much anyone under 40, they're expecting a different type of leadership, and therefore they're expecting a different type of communication. So, it's not going to be this all top down. They're wanting people to be real. They're wanting people to be authentic. They're not expecting leaders to have all the answers. In fact, they actually really love it when leaders don't have the answers so they can contribute. So I think there's a lot of things that are pushing real communications needed more than ever. And I think other things are changing so rapidly. Like when you look at technology and like things just keep changing, and I think people are feeling overwhelmed. So there's this real need to say, just explain it to me that I can understand, because there's so many things that are happening that are hard to understand at the moment. So that's why I think it's needed now more than ever.
And really now too, in a world that, trust is declining, as we know, I mean, that helps to build trust, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole lot of reports from Edelman that say where trust is at a real low. And then again, when we're talking in a way that people feel like we're hiding something, or we're using jargon that makes us sound like we're hiding something, it just increases the level of distrust. So that's important too. And of course, right now the situation we're in with coronavirus, where there's this physical disconnection, it's how can we communicate in a way that creates an emotional and a human connection, which makes it even more important than it was, 3 months ago.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things you said in your last book, Real Communication, which you can see on the banner behind you, which I have read cover to cover, and it's a great book. So it's called Real Communication, How to Be You and Lead True. And one of the things that really stood out for me was you don't need a leadership title or an acronym after your name to take a stand and show up as real. So what can we do in a practical sense, okay, regardless of where we sit in an organisation's hierarchy, to get real and share with others, whether that's our colleagues or our clients, employees, what is real for us?
Yeah, look, I think there's a few things, but for me, about taking a leadership role, regardless of title, is when you see something that's not right or wrong, or that's not right, have the courage to say something. And if you feel yourself saying, well, I'm not in the position to do that, it sometimes feels like a little bit of a cop-out, because saying I don't have the title, so I can't say it. But if we all do that, then, bad behavior goes unnoticed. And look, sometimes it is a case of picking your battles. Like, sometimes you genuinely say, I want to say something, but I know it will have zero difference. And so you make those decisions. But showing, stepping into leadership when you don't have the title, just saying this isn't right. I'll get like a recent example, like, I don't know if you saw like Lisa Wilkinson sort of, on the project, when she sort of said to the Queen, you need to stand up. Like a lot of, she's not in a position to challenge the Queen, but she's using her platform to do that, knowing that she's probably going to get some flack about that. Another simple example, the other day I came across a promo for like a business sort of online TV show, and it was for startups, and there's two males running it, and one of the questions was, what does it take to do a startup? And they go, it takes balls, it takes brains and balls. And this is in the promo ad that they're showing, and I'm just going, that is such a term. I really hate that language. And so I started to write an email to the head of the TV show, which I know, and then I stopped, and then I started, then I stopped, and I kept going, I'm not in the position to do it. But I thought, you know what, I'm going to let him know. And, did it change anything? I don't know. He got back and said, yeah, look, I understand. I wasn't comfortable with it either. So it's just doing that type of stuff, having the courage to say something.
Okay. Now, I know you hate jargon and you hate acronyms, okay? So much so that you've started a movement called Jargon Free Fridays. What's that about? Can you tell us a bit about that?
So jargon free. So I think what I hate is the unnecessary use of jargon and acronyms. So Jargon Free Friday is a fun way to raise awareness to what I think is a pretty serious problem. So the idea is it's pretty hard to give up jargon. And the reason it's hard to give up jargon is a lot of the time we don't actually realize it's jargon. A lot of times on a call, I will point out, jargon, and then people still use it, or we're using acronyms and people go, but surely everyone knows what that means. Surely everyone knows what STIs mean. Well, to me, they mean short-term incentives. To a lot of other people, they're sexually transmitted infections. So it's the overuse of it. So the idea of Jargon Free Fridays is to say, on Friday, maybe pick a word that you overuse a lot and just set yourself a challenge not to use it. So look, I got a few funny videos made up, like, if we spoke to our kids in jargon, if marriage proposals were in jargon, and it's just a fun way to raise awareness. So I think I've got actually a video of one of them. Do we want to see the video?
Absolutely.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen, and let's just have a listen to one of these videos. This is one of my faves.
I think this is my fave too.
Yeah.
Darling, there's a reason that I diarised tonight. Well, as you know, we've synergised effectively since FY13. We have met all our emotional KPIs and blatantly achieved best practice in the bedroom. But we have worked so hard on our future-proofing.
Gosh, Brad, are you?
We have blue skied, streamlined spitboard and actualise our core values in order to roll them out in real terms in and around the coalface. And yeah, okay, sure, we had to park this relationship, take it offline for a while you were outreaching in Spain with the Spanish bloke.
Ricardo,
I know. I thought we agreed to archive Ricardo. But going forward, I think we have a real opportunity to create a robust and sustainable narrative together.
Oh my God, Brad.
Jacinta, will you merge with me?
That is a very commercial offer. Let me marinate your value proposition and revert back to you by close of play.
Okay. I'll go reheat the soup. Gazpacho.
If you are sick of hearing and using corporate jargon, then head to jargonfreefridays.com and take up the challenge. It's time to get real. So yeah, that's Jargon Free Friday. So it's just, you know, go to the website, take up the challenge, introduce it to your team and your company and see if you can make a little small difference to raise awareness to how much jargon we use.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, like as I said at the beginning of this webinar, you've given me a complex about using jargon. Every time I use reaching out a lot. So thanks for reaching out. And I know you hate that. And I hear you in my head and I think, what would Gabrielle Dolan say? And then I think, she's not here, so I'm just going to use it. But I keep tripping myself up. And I, you know, it's good to be aware of the fact that, you know, we should be more authentic in our communication and use more words and phrases that make an emotional connection rather than hiding behind, you know, that type of long-winded explanation to say something more simple.
And we just don't know what we're doing. I've got another client who loves Jargon Free Fridays like you and is conscious of jargon. And the other week she sent me an email about something and she literally came back and said, I'm going to run that up the flagpole. And I thought she was doing it deliberately to stir me up. And I'm going, did you just say that as a joke? She went, oh, no, I didn't. She goes, it's a little bit jargony. A little bit jargony? Running something up a flagpole is more than jargon. Unless you're running a flag up the pole, don't run anything up a flagpole.
Exactly. So look, everyone, have a look at jargonfreefridays.com. There's some great videos there. They're hilarious. And share them with your team and with your organisation as a way to remind ourselves to use more simple and more real language. So I want to talk a little bit about storytelling now. You are a storytelling expert after all. We all know that stories are a powerful way to engage people, right? But what makes a story in a business context? What's the formula?
Look, we all share stories, right? Because we're humans and we share stories. So it's the way we communicate. And we all share stories in business, but we're going to have a certain style. So I sort of thought it might be useful to run through that first. So I might share my screen again and we'll just flip to the slides just because I'm going to show you a model here. So we have a certain style and our style is determined by two things. And first of all, is how purposeful we are. So when you're sharing stories in business, you've got to be really clear on the message. This isn't sharing stories with our mates down the pub. Not that we can do that anymore, but it's being really clear on the message. So you get, you know, one message per story. The biggest mistake people make is they try to cram too many messages into their story. And the moment you do that, it will lose its effectiveness. So that's the one thing, you know, the formula for sharing stories in business is be really, really clear on the message you're trying to get across. And then the other thing that determines your style is your engagement level. So like how engaging are your stories? So when you share your story, are people fully engaged with you the whole time? Or have they sort of stopped listening well before you've stopped talking? Now, I see sort of four styles, and one style I see is the bragger. So the bragger tends to tell a lot of stories about themselves. They tend to go on forever. There tends to be no reason except for them to tell you how great they are. And I'm sure you've all been on the end of a bragger story, you know, when they finally finish, you have this little bit of a reaction. It was like, oh, well, good on you. Oh, that's the time, got to go. So you don't want to be feeling like you're bragging when you share stories. Now, you can still share stories about the good stuff you've done, but, you know, bring in vulnerability, bring in humility, even some self-deprecating humor drags it out of the bragger space. The other style I see a lot of is the joker. So the joker tells really entertaining stories, like love the joker stories. But the joker misses out on this great business opportunity where they don't attach a key message to it. So the only reason they're sharing the story is to be funny. I see some people open presentations with a funny story because they think it's a bit of an icebreaker, but it's got nothing to do with what they were talking about. And then they go and do their boring PowerPoint presentation, and the only thing anyone remembers is the funny story that had nothing to do with the message they were trying to get across. The other style we see, and then this is the main style we see, is the reporter. So the reporter tends to, they know why they're sharing the story, but the reporter tends to only use business related stories. Now, there's nothing wrong with business related stories, but they only use them. And they can be, business related stories can be a bit dry because they tend to bring in a lot of facts and figures and statistics. So almost have like a case study feel to them. And the moment we try to cram too many stats and data and information, it loses its engagement because it starts to engage a different side of the brain. So, but that's the most common style we see, the reporter. And then the inspirer is, they're really clear on why they're sharing the story, but they use a personal story to get the message across. Now, it's not overly personal. It's not about, you know, your deepest, darkest fears and secrets. And it's also not like the big, amazing climbing Mount Everest type stories. But do you inspire action? So after you've shared your story, do people think something different as a result of that? Do they feel something different, or do they actually do something different as a result of that? So that's sort of the styles I see. And then, you know, there's a whole process of, you know, how do you start your stories, what you put in the middle, how do you end? You don't want to be starting your story with, let me tell you a story. And you certainly don't want to be ending your story with, so the moral of the story is. So there's a real skill in how you share stories effectively in business. So should I give an example? Would that be useful? Yes. Yeah. So there's one I often share around copperhead snakes, but I think I'll mix it up a bit because I heard a great story the other day. I was running virtual training workshop with Amazon, and this woman shared the best story. And when I say the best, it just really highlights the simplicity of this. So a lot of the time when I go into organizations, it's around how they communicate values. So how they communicate the company values around using personal stories. And so one of the company values was ownership. So we go through the process of, what does ownership mean? So again, it's really important to go, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? And to her name was Emma, she said, what it means is doing the hard stuff as well as doing the fun stuff. Like we tend to take ownership of the stuff we like doing, and you know, the hard stuff we don't worry about. So the story she shared was when she was an eight-year-old kid, and she really wanted to get a fish. So she begged her parents for a fish. And they decided they bought her a fish, but on the condition that they had to look after the fish. So her and her brother, they had to feed the fish. And
Ral, you've frozen. Is it just me, or has Gabriel frozen for everybody?
One day that the fish tank started to get cloudy, but she left it for a few days until she came home one day and realized that the fish was floating on top of the water, dead. And she said, my little eight-year-old heart broke, and she was screaming out to her mum and dad, and her dad came down and got the fish and started wiggling it around and blew on it and said, massaged it and kept putting it in the water, and the fish came back to life and like lived for another 12 years, which is amazing for a goldfish. So she uses that story to say, you know, when I think of ownership, it's not about doing the fun stuff like feeding the fish. It's actually also doing the hard stuff and the boring stuff like cleaning the tank. And the impact that had on her team, though, it's like, so it sort of makes you really get it. And she has now used that for new graduates coming in, she shares that story. And I just think it beautifully shows how you can share a personal story, a little simple personal story, and link it to a business message.
Now, that's a great example, and I've heard the Copperhead Snake story a number of times, but and I noticed that somebody in the chat indicated that they really enjoyed that one too. Would you mind sharing the Copperhead Snake story with us as well? Because I'm sure that others on this call are just like the rest of us, and that is, we find this a little difficult to actually bring these stories to life in a business context.
Yeah, I've just seen someone else in the chat say, yeah, the snake story still stands out. It's amazing. And so this is a highlight too. A lot of people go, do people get sick of hearing stories? And I go, people have heard me share this Copperhead Snake story, but still say, can you share it again? So no, people don't get sick of hearing good stories. Okay, so let me set it up again. I was working with, I ran some training workshop for a risk team. So the entire risk team, and the head of risk, her name was Rosemary. And she said that the biggest issue I have is that when I'm talking to the business units I support and risk is raised, they all look at me and go, you're the risk manager, that's your job. And she said, it doesn't matter how many times I've explained to them that I cannot manage their risk for them. All I can do is help them manage their risk. The behavior doesn't change, right? So she's given case study after case study and the message does not get through. So this is the story Rosemary started to share. She said, when I was a kid, I grew up on a farm. And growing up on a farm, there was all these dangers we needed to be aware of, but Mum would teach us what to do. So we knew what to do if we ever came across a redback spider in the timber heap. We knew about the potential traps in the dam after heavy rain, and we knew what to do if we came across a snake in summer. And I remember this really hot day, Mum was yelling at me to get my bike from the front gate. So I ran down the path and then I froze because in front of my bike was this massive copperhead snake. But I remembered everything Mum taught us to do. So I played statues and I slowly walked backwards until there was enough space between me and the snake, and I ran back to the house to tell Mum. And I'm sharing this with you because it reminds me of the role we play in risk. All I can do is give you the skills, knowledge and advice. So when you come across your own copperhead snake, regardless of what that looks like, you will know what to do. So I love that story for, again, a lot of ways. It's a really simple story, but, you know, I would ask, you know, if you've just heard that story for the first time, does it help you understand the role of a risk manager? Will you remember it? And you will remember it. And if potentially just saved your life, you now know what to do if you come across a snake. And could you retell it to someone else without losing its meaning? And when it comes to communication, that's your biggest challenge. Do people actually understand what you're saying? Can they remember it? And then can they actually retell it and do something about it?
That's a great story, and I agree with everyone in the chat. That is gold, and something that we keep remembering. So sounds simple enough, but how should you actually introduce storytelling in your organisation if it's not been done before? I mean, it's one of those communication techniques that people and more people are getting interested in. But how are we supposed to do that if we've never done it before? And where are you supposed to find all these work-related stories?
Yeah, look. There's a couple of things you said at the start. I'm actually researching for my next book. It's called Stories That Bind: How to Connect Customers and Engage Employees. And part of that was going out to all my, network, especially the professional communicators, saying, I want examples of stories that companies are using stories. The vast amount of times when I was directed to, this company's using stories or this company's doing it, they weren't. Like a corporate video is not storytelling. And so calling something a story isn't a story. So when I go into organizations, there's a few things involved. I might just share my screen again to show this. So storytelling is really popular at the moment, but it's a skill. If sharing stories was easy, everyone would be doing it and everyone would be doing it right. So the first place I started is at the top of this model is the skilling process. So look, I know I might be biased because, my whole business is about teaching people how to do it properly, but I find it really sad when companies go, we expect our leaders to share stories and then don't teach them how to do it. It is setting them up for failure, because this is what I see. I see people share a story, it goes too long, it's too personal, it's not started properly, it doesn't end on message, and it's a complete failure. So what does that person do? They never share story again because they thought, I tried that and it didn't work. So there's a real skilling process. And then what that education process does, it starts to help people how they capture stories. So where do you find your stories? Not only your own personal stories, like the fish and, you know, Cough the fish and the snake, but how do you start to find stories within your organization that you could use? So, you know, an individual might have a great example of a customer service that their employees did, and then they share it. So again, how we move around that and how do we share it? So there's this process of capturing stories, collating them, and then communicating and sharing them out, and finding some really cool different ways to do that. And then the final bit is generate. And that's really about, like it or not, what we do. People are sharing stories about us based on what we do and what we say and the decisions we make. So make sure that that's aligned with what we actually want. So I always start with educating. You've got to skill people, then we start to capture and share and generate, and then it sort of goes around like that.
Okay. And for those of you who are subscribed to your newsletter, they would have read about this yesterday, but you made a point of this in your blog yesterday. What comes first, the story or the message?
Yeah, look, normally it's the message. So normally it's okay, I need to communicate ownership. I need to communicate diversity and inclusion. I need to communicate our new strategy, our new purpose. So it normally does start there, and that's where predominantly my work comes in. But once your radar goes up to stories, once you realize the power of these little personal stories, you notice things. So, for example, every time something stupid happens to me, my first reaction is, that's a story I could use. So I wrote about this in my blog the other day. So my youngest daughter, Alex, has got me into using wine drops in red wine. So, you know, if you add 5 drops, it's meant to reduce or the effect preservatives have on you. So yeah, you knock yourself out. But so last Friday, we were having a drink. Alex was home. Pour a drink. I put the 5 drops in. Alex goes to refill our glasses and just says, holds up the bottle and says, "Mum, you didn't put these in the wine, did you?" And I'm going, "Well, of course I did," like thinking, you're the one that told me about them. And then she went, "Mum, these are eye drops, not wine drops." And she's mortified. She's going, "You probably poisoned us." I was like, so my first reaction was, well, who was the idiot that left the eye drops next to the wine bottle? But then my second reaction was like, I so could use this story. So I think, you know, this would be a great story around assumptions, how we make assumptions based on, you know, things, because, you know, the bottles were similar. So I just store that away going, you know, if I ever need a story around assumptions, that's the story I could use. So it does do both, but you sort of got to be open to it. You got to be open to seeing how could I use these stories, and they will come to you.
Okay. Now, you mentioned a couple of things when you were telling us about the formula for good storytelling, and you said one key message, and you know, it has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And yes, I agree with Michelle. You make it sound so easy, but can you just talk us through a little bit about you know, what are some of the you know, do's and don'ts? Like you mentioned timing. Like how long should a story? And things like that.
So one of the misconceptions around storytelling, and I think because we've all heard people share stories and you've had that reaction, it's like, oh my God, just get to the point, is that you've got to be really succinct. So my guide is about 1 to 2 minutes. Okay. And there's a real discipline in making sure your stories can get to 1 to 2 minutes. Now, I've seen beautiful stories work perfectly around 30 seconds. Some people can pull it off longer than 2 minutes, but be rest assured, when you're sharing a story in business, it doesn't matter how exciting you think your story is. In a business setting, people will be thinking, get to the point. And they might even be thinking that for so long, they say, get to the point. You actually want to be finished your story well before people are thinking, get to the point. So there can be a little bit of intrigue. Like, you know, when Rosemary's talking about the copperhead snake, there could be a bit of intrigue about, well, where's this going? But if it's only 1 to 2 minutes, you'll get to the point and you get people go, I see now. So 1 to 2 minutes. So one of the most common mistakes is people just go way too long. They put way too much information. One of the keys to that is, like I said, if you've got to have one message per story, and you can just imagine, if you've got like 3, if you're trying to cram 3 messages into your story, then all of a sudden, oh, well, this is important, this is important, this is important, and you're adding all this information in, and it just goes too long. So that's one of the main reasons, one of the main mistakes. Like I said, you don't want to start your story with "let me tell you a story." We, as humans, we're hardwired to tell stories and we're hardwired to listen to stories. But ironically, when someone says, "let me tell you a story," the reaction can be a little bit of, "oh, please don't." Just like, tell me the point. So it seems like starting your story with time and place. Like, time and place is such a natural way to start your story. When I was a kid, I grew up on a farm, time and place. When I was 8, I wanted a goldfish, time and place. This morning at gym, 3 years ago, I went on a holiday to Vietnam. Last Friday, I was having a drink of wine with my daughter. So can you just see these are time and place, and they're natural segues into your story. So that's almost like the beginning. If you think, it's the classic beginning, middle, and end. The middle is when you're determining what detail to put in and what to leave out. And the ending is, you want them to get the message, but you don't want to be telling them. So you don't want to be saying, so the moral of the story is you need to do this. You need to be, the ending needs to be, they still need to get it, but it needs to be respectful and inviting.
Okay. What about, I mean, this is almost a no-brainer, but what about truth versus embellishment?
Yeah. See, look, it's funny. In my workshop, I actually asked the question, does your story need to be true as long as...
Oh, we've lost you again, Ral. Ral, we've lost you if you can hear us. Hello.
With that. So for several reasons. It's much easier to find your own... Whoops.
Sorry for a sec, you froze. Would you
mind?
mind?
I froze. Okay. Because very important point. It's like... That's okay. It's so your stories always have to be true. For several reasons. It's so much easier to find your own stories than to make up stories. And the only reason people make up stories is because they think that their stories aren't big enough, like they're not important enough. But Cough the Fish, Copperhead Snake, wine bottle, they're all just day-to-day stories. So that's the first thing to realize, that your day-to-day personal stories are the most relevant. So don't bother making them up. The second thing is, people go, it's just a little white lie. What's the harm? There is massive harm. So could you imagine if Rosemary shared her Copperhead Snake story and you responded the way you did, as in, yeah, like, I like that song, that story, I related to it. And then you said to Rosemary, "Oh, I grew up on a farm too. Where did you grow up?" And she said, "Oh, I grew up in Sydney. I just made that up." Now, she's actually now told you she's made up the story, but where's her credibility? It's gone. So it's a long way back from that. It's more than a lie. It's more than a little white lie. It's more than a big lie. It's actually a betrayal of trust, that you deliberately tried to manipulate me, emotionally manipulate me, and I fell for it. So it's just not worth the backlash to your credibility, to make up and to manufacture stories. And look, one of the added benefits of when you share personal stories is people get to know you a little bit more, and it actually strengthens relationships. So if you were starting at that point of lying, then there's just no need, and it can backfire really badly.
Okay. What about vulnerability? I mean,
I've just seen a question from Lynette saying, what about telling other stories without their permission? So yes, sometimes, so for example, you can see Rosemary's Copperhead Snake story. It's not my story. It was about Rosemary. I have asked for her permission to share it. I have asked for Emma's permission to share the cough story. I mean, especially when I'm going out writing about it in a blog, I've asked for permission. So I would always ask permission, and I think 99% of the time people will always be flattered that you think that their story is worth repeating. Obviously if it paints them in a really bad light, you're not going to share that story, and maybe you just change the name.
Yeah. So are you still collecting stories for your new book?
Yes, I am. So the first draft's written. So yes, if anyone in this community knows of companies that are doing really cool stuff with storytelling, one of the case studies I've done, like Fullerton Hotel are doing some really cool stuff with sharing stories, from their Fullerton Hotel in Singapore. There's a restaurant in Florida called the Colombian Restaurant. It's 5th generation owned. They just do amazing stuff with stories. And when I interviewed the owner, I asked, when did they start realizing the power of stories? You know what their answer was? I thought their answer might have been 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Their answer was 1946. It was just like, they actually hired a journalist to come to the new restaurant every night, sit at the bar, talk to customers, talk to people that have worked there for years, and just write stories about them. In 1946, they realised this. So if anyone's doing some cool stories around how they communicate their values or their purpose or their customers, I would love to hear about it, because there's still some room for some more examples in the book.
Okay, and you'll share your details with us a little later on. I just want to get back to the question I was going to ask you earlier about vulnerability, which I know is quite difficult for most leaders to demonstrate. And we've seen some recent examples throughout the coronavirus pandemic with people like Arnie Sorensen from Married International, and he did a great video. I mean, never mind the fact that, you know, the company's actions didn't match his words, but in the end, which was disappointing. But I mean, as an address to his employees, that was a great example of demonstrating authenticity and vulnerability in a message. You know, do you have any tips for us to share with our leaders? Because trying to get them to be vulnerable in a business context is really difficult.
Yeah, look, I think it comes down to, and you know, I saw a recent, it was actually with Alan Joyce when he announced all the job cuts at Qantas. You could see the way he was doing that he was gutted by that. So I think what we tend to do, or what leaders tend to do, is when they've got to deliver this news like this, they bring in all the very logical reasons why. Now, people know the logical reasons why. No one's blaming Alan Joyce for having, like, we know why Qantas have to, so we know the logical reasons why. I think it's important for them to bring it, not only explaining why we're doing it and the logic, but for them to actually show and perhaps even talk about how they're feeling about this. So when, you know, when a CEO says, I've got, you know, that they feel devastated, but so that helps. They can't just say the words, people have to see it. So again, there's got to be this congruence. If you're going, oh, I'm really devastated about this, like, that's not going to go. But if people can genuinely see it, I think it works. And as you said, it's then got to be congruent. So if you're upset for your employees, then treat them well when you're do them everything. So your words and actions have to be congruent. But I think more and more leaders are realizing that showing a bit of vulnerability is okay, that not having the answers to everything is okay. And it's actually what people respond to, because, you know, as Brené Brown says, it's our greatest sign of courage, and it's the one thing we're reluctant to show, but when we do show it, it's what people really admire and respect. So look, some leaders are going to take longer to get there, some will never get there, but I think there's a whole generation that are stepping into it a bit more easily.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one other thing on this storytelling. Can you just explain to us what a story is not? I know I've done your storytelling workshop, and you use the examples about the about us on websites and things like that. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, look, there's a real trend on websites to change the about us to our story, and calling something a story is not a story. So first of all, a timeline of your company is not a story. It's a timeline. That's why it's called a timeline. Just as, like, if some people go our story, and then you do it and you go, there's actually no story. It's just your purpose statement. It's your vision statement. It's your strategy on a page. That's what it is. It's strategy on a page. I'll grab a prop here, because I have my little props handy for it. Reese is one of my I love shopping at Reese. They have some really cool clothes. But on the back of this, it says, this is our story. So this is a great example where it says, this is our story. Now I'll just read it. It's a paragraph. It says, Reese is a world-class modern British heritage brand positioned between the high street and luxury markets. From one store in London in 1971 to over 130 stores all over the globe today, Reese has established a design-led philosophy centered on creating directional menswear, womenswear, and accessories. It has become an authority on true style for both men and women.
So how does that mean?
that is not a story. I mean, what is a design-led philosophy centered on directional menswear and women's wear? So can you see how that is not a story, but they've called it our story. So yeah, if you're gonna call something a story, just make sure it's actually a story.
Okay, got it. So right now, organisations and leaders are, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, are revisiting their organisation's values and their purpose, okay, through the entire period. What advice would you give them for making their values and purpose mean something right now?
Probably most of the people on your call would be old enough to have gone through, the values rollouts. Remember the values rollouts? And it's normally a new CEO. These are our values, and they'll have bullet points underneath what the values mean. They'll plaster them all over the walls. There was a time we used to get it on our coffee mugs and mouse pads. Remember mouse pads? So, no one uses mouse pads anymore, or coffee mugs. To me, that was a very tick the box approach to communicating values. And it was almost to the point, if people knew what they were, we would think we've communicated them. And then we used to actually make it easier and try to make it an acronym, like a word, like our values are CARE, which means customers are like, oh my God, seriously. Anyway, to me, I truly don't believe that you can communicate a value as a leader without sharing a personal story. So to me, the work I do is I literally, a lot of the time I go in and go, okay, these are our company values. And I educate leaders. So I educate them how to tell stories, but then go, well, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to you? And most of the time, it's the first time they've actually thought, oh, I haven't thought about it this much before. So we got time for another quick example.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is an example. I did some work with the company. One of their values was doing the right thing. So one of the leaders, her name was Anne, went through the process. So what does doing the right thing mean to you? So it means this. It means doing what you say you're going to do. It means respect. She went through it all, and then she went, what it really means to me though is doing the right thing all the time, not just when people are watching or just not when it suits us. She goes, we're very good at doing the right thing when it suits us. So went through the process. I go, okay, so where have you experienced this before? So this is the story Anne shared, and this is quite a few years ago. And I know Anne has said that every time she starts in a new job, she shares this story. And every time someone new comes and works for her, she shares this story with them. So as I share this story, if I could ask you to think about, imagine if Anne was your new manager, right? And so this is sort of like the, meet and greet, get to meet the induction. And she shares this story. In the 1960s, my dad was a professional swimmer, and he got the point in his career that he was actually trialing for the Australian swim squad. And so on the day of the meet, he was apparently winning his race, and he did the tumble turn and he slightly misjudged the wall. Now, this was way before technology, so there was no sensors. They had judges at the end, but all the splashing, he knew that they would not know whether he touched the wall or not. So he had to make a split-second decision. Does he go back and touch the wall, or does he just keep going? And he decided to go back and touch the wall. Now, you don't really recover from that. He didn't. I think he came 7th. And he never made the Australian swim squad, and therefore never knew if he'd be good enough for the Olympics. And Anne would always say to her dad, do you ever regret going back to touch the wall? He said, I've never regretted going back to touch the wall, because if I didn't go back and touch the wall, I would have to spend the rest of my life knowing I did the wrong thing. And it's only a matter of time before we will come across our own go back and touch the wall moments. I invite you to consider what my dad would do. So I put it to you, if your new manager, if your new boss, if your new leader, if your new CEO has come in and shared that story, what culture does that create? Like, that creates, this is saying we're not here to win at all costs. This is saying I will have your back if you do the right thing, even though we don't meet our targets. It's showing integrity. It's showing respect. It's showing that this is not a company value to Anne. This is how she was raised. She was raised this way. So it does all this heavy lifting. You know, I still keep in contact with Anne, and that's exactly what she said. She goes, I know that story does so much heavy lifting. She's now changed companies. One of the new company she works with, their value is honesty. And she goes, I just share the same story, but link it to honesty. So, and you know, you can't, to me, that value only comes alive through that story.
Absolutely. That's a really powerful example. Thanks for sharing that. Alrighty, so we're going to have a look at, we're going to address some questions in a moment, but before we do, we're going to finish on a round of rapid fire questions, if you don't mind. So,
okay.
You have 30 seconds to answer the following questions, and your time starts now. Least favourite jargon word?
Pivot.
Second least favourite jargon word?
Optics.
Optics. Third least favourite jargon word?
Journey.
Journey. Okay, you have to explain that one. Favourite non-famous business leader and why?
I'm going to call out a man called Phil Davis, who worked at National Australia Bank when I worked there, and he was like in my early 20s, and he took a punt on me in a leadership and development role, and he was a great manager. And then when I left NAB, he took another punt on me, and he was my first client. So he brought me into NAB to run storytelling training. So he always saw the potential in me and gave me opportunities. So shout out to Phil Davis. He's since retired, but he's a lovely man. Okay.
Describe meeting Barack Obama in 2 words.
Bloody brilliant.
Oh, I was going to say bloody.
That was amazing. Can I share? I've got the photo.
Yeah.
Look at that.
And that's next to Barack, isn't it?
Yeah, that's so right next to under Barack's is my daughter Alex, you know, red wine drops. Okay. So Alex and I met him in Malaysia when I was running leadership training for the Obama Foundation.
And you almost didn't take this photo, did you?
No, well, so he walked by, we thought he'd actually left, and he walked by, and you know, people like you, oh my God. And then everyone comes up and says, do not take photos, you're not allowed to take photos. And then we waited for him to come back, and we were all waving. These were a few other speakers, and he actually broke, like he's surrounded by security. He actually saw that we were speakers, and he broke rank, and he came over and said, the speakers, thank you so much for the work you do, shook our hands, asked us what we did. And he's the one that said, let's get a photo. So it was like, I reckon my heart didn't stop pounding for about like an hour. And Alex, it was Alex's 19th birthday, hence why she was with me. And she said, Mum, that's the best day of my life. So, you know, mother of the year.
All right, that's beautiful. Speaking of authenticity, how come you don't read your own Audible books?
Oh my God, I do not have a voice for audio books, and I get so many people go, oh, you should read it. And so I had to do a trial. You've got to read like 3 minutes. After about the 20th take of trying to read the introduction, and I'm stumbling over my own words I wrote, I just went, oh man, I just can't be bothered doing that. So maybe one day, but I don't know.
All right, beautiful. Thank you so much, Rock. Now, can you show us that slide you've got with the details of your...
Oh, yeah.
And also tell us how people can contact you if they have stories that they would like to share for your...
Yeah, okay. So there's a couple of things coming up. These are... just send me an email. So emails at gabrielle@gabrielledolan.com. If you're not on my database and want to, you can subscribe here to the database and receive the 7-day storytelling starter kit. So that'll just sort of keep you going. But, you know, connect on LinkedIn and all the usual suspects. And, they're my books. Hey, can I let you in on a little secret? The fact that I've written so many books, I actually failed English in my final year of English.
Oh, so, my.
I know. What do teachers know? I always thought 50% of pass and 51% a wasted effort, and I missed it by that much. I got 49%. Anyway.
Oh wow!
A very stupid strategy that I don't. And I do have. This is going to be very short notice because one of these are tomorrow. But I'm running virtual training for the very first time, public workshops. So I'm doing storytelling on the 9th of July and the 14th of July, and then how to present with impact, both on stage and online, on the 22nd and the 29th of July. And I've introduced pricing around that. It's called Koha, which is a New Zealand Maori tradition, Koha, which means you pay what you can afford, but you respect the value you're getting. So there's different price levels, really ranging, literally going, yep, no, things are okay at the moment, I'm good, or to, yeah, okay, or no, pretty crap. So whatever financial position you're in at the moment, and I'm very conscious that people have been hit financially with this, so you just get in and pay what you can. But yeah, one's tomorrow. If you want to do that, jump in early. And it's just on Eventbrite. So it's just get on it. If you get on to Eventbrite and search me, or the link is there. But yeah, that's it.
And I have done the business story, Gabrielle's business storytelling workshop, and it is amazing. So I can personally vouch for that. I have not done presenting with impact. Maybe that's one I should do next. Excellent. Alrighty. Thank you so much for that, Ra. Megan, can you let us know, do we have any questions?
Hi, yes, we've had a couple come through. The first one was from Marty, and she's asked, how do you get over the feeling of self-indulgence while sharing personal stories?
That's a really good point. So the whole reason why you're sharing stories is to help your audience understand something. So when you come from a place of service where it's about them and it's not about you, then that helps. When you're deciding on the detail, if your stories are going way too long, and this is what I say to people, if your stories are going way too long, then suddenly the storytelling comes about you when it's about them. I find 95% of people are reluctant to do it because they feel like, oh, what, people wouldn't be interested, as opposed to the opposite.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Sai's asked if Barack uses stories.
He does use stories. So he actually, in his, I didn't train him. God, I would love to take the credit for that. But when he was running for president, he would often share little anecdotes. So he would give his policy, and then he would often go, you know, last week I was speaking to a mechanic, Bill, and Bill was telling me. So he would bring in these little snippets to reinforce the message he was getting across. And the Obama Foundation used stories. The whole reason I went over is because they wanted to educate their people on how to do that better.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, very good. Thanks. And Michelle has asked, are any leaders getting it right at the moment?
It's really hard in the public domain because what you tend to see on TV and media is not the story. It's just the snippets. I'm going to go back to Alan Joyce. I think he shares stories well. In the good old days, back in the day when I would be on Qantas planes, I would always read his, the letter from the CEO because he uses them. Michael Abid, who works at Telstra, I worked with Michael when he was CEO of SBS, and he uses stories well. Look, there's a lot of leaders doing it. They're probably two of the most well-known ones, but yeah, there's a few around.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? There's a few comments that are coming through.
I've just seen one. Alan being Irish has an unfair advantage. Anyone being Scottish has an unfair advantage of sharing stories too, because they just tend to do that. But having said that, sometimes when we come from a culture where it's really natural to share stories, especially the Scottish, they may tend to be more on the joker side of things. So yeah, there's certainly some cultures that share stories more willingly than others.
Excellent. Okay. And just one final thing, Raul, when is your book out?
The book is due to come out in March next year. So fingers crossed, I can have a face-to-face book launch and do stuff.
Yes.
But yeah, I need to have it. It's a pretty long tail from when the manuscript needs to be completed by September, and then it goes over to Wiley and goes through a lot of stuff before it hits bookstores. But I'm pretty excited about that.
Excellent. I think we just got one last question, Megan.
Yes, from Nicole. She's asked, when trying to get your leaders to understand why developing storytelling skills is important to senior leaders, what are the top selling points you'd use? That's a good question.
I would use a story to highlight the importance of story. So that's one of the things I would do. Besides that too, it's also bringing in, I often quote Aristotle. So Aristotle said that when we're trying to influence people, we need three things: logos, ethos, and pathos. And logos is logic, ethos is personal credibility, and pathos is emotional connection. And the two most important are personal credibility and emotional connection. And which story can do, when you share a story, can do that. And logic is the least important, but it's where we spend the vast majority of our time. And so there's a, you know, even asking them, so, you know, you went to that conference last year, what do you remember from it? And I can almost guarantee you that they could have seen 10 speakers. What they'll remember is a story someone shared. So it's helping them realize the power of story. And again, this is, I get a lot of requests from CEOs to do one-on-one training, and I actually refuse to do it. I say we've got to do it as a team, because it's in that process when one of their colleagues share a story and they go, oh, wow, that really had an impact on me. They experience the power of it. And until they've experienced the power of it, they're going to be very reluctant to then share stories.
Okay. And I think one last question and then we have to wrap up. Megan, did we get one?
Yeah. So as best practice, would you, and this is from Owen, as best practice, would you recommend using the most important, relevant part at the start, middle, or end? And would that change when writing stories?
Yeah, so I'll address the writing stories first. When you're writing a story, I just think it's a similar thing. It needs to be succinct. It's probably got to be shorter. So I write blogs. I don't use stories in every blog I do, but I try to role model it. And when I write a blog, say if the blog's 500 words, the story will be like 300 or 400, and then just the point. So the story makes the point. If you're doing a presentation, I would highly recommend that a really engaging way to start your presentation is with a personal story that sets up what you're talking about. So could you imagine if Rosemary was doing a presentation on risk management, and she got on stage and the first thing she said was, when I was a kid, I grew up on a farm. And she told the story and then said, and what I want to do today is talk to you about helping you identify all your copperhead snakes. So it sets up the presentation. And she could actually then just refer back to copperhead snakes, which has now become the analogy of risk. But I would, if you're only going to tell two stories, I'd start your presentation with a story and end your presentation with a story. That is what people remember. And in the middle, you can probably just stand on stage and go, blah, 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 blah. It's like, job done.
Alrighty, okay, we're going to have to leave it there because it is 10:59 here in Melbourne. So we're at the top of the hour, but I just wanted to say, Rael, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. I love our chats. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and talents today. A very big thank you to everybody for your participation today. We'll be sending you the recording and the slides later today, sometime later today. I just wanted to just tell you about our next Lifting the Lid webinar, which will be held on the 19th of August at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time with UK-based values and ethics expert Jane Mitchell, who is a hoot. You will love her. So we're going to be talking about demonstrating our value in a world turned upside down. So stay tuned for more information about that. Please get in touch if you have any feedback about today. I'd love to hear your thoughts. On that note, please stay safe and well. And if you're in Melbourne, good luck for the next 6 weeks. We're being locked down again from midnight tonight. So stay safe and well, and bye for now.